Hello everyone, my name is Molly and I'm from JCU Tropwater and I'm a science communicator. I have a keen interest in communication agriculture and I'm a facilitator of Tropwater's Water Quality Agriculture Hub with Zoe Bainbridge and Steve Lewis. Today, Tracy and I will talk about Pharmacists Beneath Your Feet project based in Mackay. Now this project looks at pesticide stewardship in a new way through the lens of the farmer. Okay. Cool, am I? So we know that billions of dollars have been poured into improving water quality for the Great Barrier Reef. This is about tourism, sustainability, marine industries, and protecting one of the world's natural wonders. We don't argue with this, we agree. Everyone here today works in the reef space. Of course, our research, our projects, and initiatives are focused on reef values. That is our job. It is our mission. It's what matters to us. But let's just take a step back. The story we don't tell is this: poor water quality that harms the reef doesn't start there. It starts on the paddock. Its exposure holds the greatest threat there. If it damages the marine environment, what is it doing at its source? Even though we know the risks are greatest the closer you get to the farm, we still frame pesticide stewardship as do it for the reef, not do it for your family. Many farmers have made big changes for the reef, but many haven't. We've had years of engagement, media, science, and monitoring, and still some practices don't stick. In lots of ways, we've hit a wall. So why is that? Maybe it's because we're not talking to the values that matters most to farmers, their families, their livelihoods, and their communities. So I'm going to tell a bit of a story. And I hope that through this, I can show you why our messaging of the last 2 decades may not be hitting home, and why there might be a more meaningful way to have conversations about pesticide stewardship. This is me. I grew up on a farm in a very small town called Dalberg. Dalberg was a farming community. We're about an hour away from the nearest populated town. There are 13 kids at my school and 6 when it shut down. And at its peak, the whole town maybe had about 100 people. It was very remote and very isolated, and I loved it. My parents grew sugarcane and zucchini. My childhood wasn't sports, afternoons at the park, or shopping. My days were spent playing in the cane fields, running down ploughed rows and climbing paperbark trees. I remember waking up at 4 a.m. to ride in my uncle's haul-out truck as he crushed the cane, during cane crushing, sorry. I still remember that smell of the freshly cut cane, sweet and musky. I can hear the sound of the loco train slowly grinding along the tracks. From a young age, we worked on the farm. At 8 years old, I would drive the tractor and plant seedlings in the paddock. Our family and other families in the community would go down to the river in the afternoons, swim in the rapids, climb trees, and catch fish. Farming wasn't a job. It shaped our lives. It was part of us. We valued the land, the community, family, and our local environment. This is my dad's family. They were Irish immigrants, with my dad about 8 years old when he came to Australia. They came to Australia to farm because that is all my granddad wanted to do. And as the youngest of 4 siblings, he had absolutely no hope to do this in Ireland. My granddad's name was placed in a hat along with other immigrants and war veterans. His name was drawn from that hat and he was allowed to buy the farm in Dalberg, that very farm I grew up on. Now the DPI taught granddad how to farm tobacco, how to plant, how to cut, and what chemicals to use. Later, they then taught him how to farm rice and then sugarcane, how to plant, how to cut, and what chemicals to use. What we didn't know at the time is that tobacco farming used some of the harshest chemicals. My grandfather farmed tobacco in the 1950s when the highly toxic chemicals like DDT and dildron were common. These chemicals cause cancer and has been linked to neurological disorders. Some can cause seizures. My grandfather developed epilepsy during the time of farming tobacco, which increased in severity over years. Now, we can't know for sure if his epilepsy was genetic, exposure-related, both, or neither. But given the era and the chemicals in use, his exposure, and what we know now, it's plausible. And my dad adamantly believes these pesticides caused it. These are my aunts, Maureen and Anna. They both worked on the farm stringing tobacco, which was common for women to do this. Later, they both developed cancer. Maureen cared for Anna when she was dying, and then 6 months later, Maureen died of breast cancer. DDT is now known as likely to be carcinogenic. These chemicals have been also proven to disrupt female reproductive hormones during puberty, linked with higher breast cancer risk. Again, we can't know for sure, but the exposures were real, the timing is biologically plausible, and the science supports caution. And my dad adamantly believes pesticide were the cause. Here is my dad, Sean. Owen, Dad's best mate, was a crop duster. For those of you who don't know, a crop duster is a plane that sprays pesticides or fertilizers over paddocks. This was a very common method from the 70s. In the early days of crop dusting, people sometimes stood in fields as human markers to guide the pilots. My dad would mark the pilots for Owen, standing out in the field, getting drenched in pesticides as the plane flew over. My dad is mortified now that he did this. On the farm, before I was born, when my dad would spray his own crops, he would mix pesticide without any protective clothing. And he neither confirms or denies that he mixed this pesticide with his bare hands. These kinds of stories aren't unique in farming families. This is simply just what you did. No, backwards. Now, I'm happy to say my dad went on to be a very progressive farmer. He was one of the first to cut green, use trickle irrigation, and implement dual row. And yes, he has stopped being Owen's marker. By the 90s, he was wearing a hat and shoes. When I was a child, we had strict rules when Dad was spraying pesticides. The whole house was shut tight. Windows and doors were closed, and we weren't allowed outside, which is like the first time. All the clothes were off the line. I can still remember, though, that sickly, rotten fruit, potent chemical smell that would seep through the windows. I also remember that where the pesticides were mixed outside near the shed, the ground was discoloured like a yellowy green. It stunk of chemicals all year round, even when there were no spills, and everything was dead around it. So, do you remember the toxic tobacco chemicals, Dildren and DDT, I mentioned earlier? They were banned in 1987, the year I was born. By this time, Granddad's epilepsy was so severe, he couldn't farm anymore. And Dad, who was in Melbourne at the time, had to return to take over the farm. Later, his sisters were diagnosed with cancer. It really wasn't until the 90s when Dad started to shift his practices so they were safer. When I spoke to Dad about this, why he was a marker for Owen, why he may or may not have mixed the chemicals with his hands, he said, honestly, Molly, the risks were probably on the labels. But why wasn't until the chemicals were banned, his father had epilepsy, he had 3 children, and his sisters had cancer, that he actually took notice? Why? Dad believes adamantly, without hesitation, that pesticides are the cause of our family illnesses. It wasn't until this connection was made that it strongly motivated practice change, because family was high value. Over here are common pesticides that are used now. You can see the health risks are right there, right next to the environmental risks. If the label isn't motivating environmental change with billions of dollars in reef water quality science projects engagement, do we really expect it to work for human health with no engagement, no projects, no research? Do we really expect farmers to truly understand the health risks? Why are we not putting so much effort into making growers aware of the environmental risks and not the health risks? My mum and dad went to many workshops dedicated to environmental risks, but they can't remember many, if any, dedicated to human health risk. For the past 20 years, scientists have been conducting water quality monitoring to show evidence of runoff impact on the reef and ecosystems. We monitor how pesticides move across the catchment in creeks, waterways, and marine systems. The goal of this data is to motivate growers to adjust their practices to protect the Great Barrier Reef. In this project that we are working on, we are shifting the focus. For the first time, we are monitoring pesticide loss pathways on the farm, not the catchment. It is a place we know that the pesticide's harm is at its greatest. The team is collecting fine-scale water quality data from rainwater tanks, farm bores, and public bores, and high-risk human exposure sites, like mixing sites. These results are mapping how pesticide residues move through farms and into water sources used by homes and neighbours. We are looking at hotspots of health risks, not just environmental risk. We are changing the way we are looking at the data and what that means, not only for the environment, but for the farmer and his family. We are shifting the focus from reef values to farm values, to what growers could believe, something they could do. As I wrap up, I want to express again that my grandparents' love for the farm, they passed that love to my dad, and my parents passed that love to me, and I have passed that love to my children. Showing how pesticides impact human health isn't going to stop growers from farming. Growers love the land and they love their family. Pesticide and human health is not something they're likely to dismiss or ignore. It is something they could believe, just like my dad. And for the reef, well, those practices protect the health of farming families have the same positive benefits for the environment. Okay. To Tracy.
Oh, goodness, I can't see that. Now I'm going to tell you, Molly had all the beautiful pictures and now I'm going to get up here and show you some really boring stats. But essentially what I want to show you here is this is not a past problem. This is the future problem. So this is data that we've collected from the cohort that we're actively working with as part of the Beneath Your Feet project. Hang on, I'm going to have to go for a walk. So you can see here, when we went and spoke to people, 75% of people, actually more than 75% of people think that their pesticides currently presents low or no risk to their family. I can't see anything. 90% think their pesticide use presents low or no risk to their local community. It's only around 50% indicating that they'll use a lower toxicity product when possible. Less than 50% consider health toxicity when assessing the risk of chemical use. And Molly mentioned the label, so probably only around 1 in 3% feel confident when they're reading the label. And it's less than 50% agree that pesticides impact local water quality. So this is not a past problem. This is something that we're actively needing to work with now. Oh, perfect. How's this? So telling people risks can be challenging, right? So we know that. And we want to be really careful in the approach that we're taking in terms of communicating these risks to people, because what we know from other work that's been done, this is the protection motivation theory, I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, is that when communicating risk, we can actually inadvertently trigger people into what we call maladaptive responses. So when we get that real uncomfortable feeling when people tell us something risky, there's kind of two things we can do. We can cognitively reframe the risk to say, this isn't relevant to me, this is a past problem, I don't trust the science. Don't move, I'm standing very still. Or we can do something about it. And the way to do that is that when you're communicating the risk, you need to pair that information very clearly with what they can do about it. So we call this self-efficacy. So you really need to build the extent to which people feel like I've heard the risk and there's something I can do about it now, right now. How do we do that? So through this project, we're collecting information. We're giving people information about the risks to them on their farm using locally collected data with an organisation that they trust. But that's just our foot in the door. Don't walk. That's just our foot in the door, right? That's just the opener of our conversation. The real focus of our project is talking to them about, okay, you've heard about the risks. What can you do about it? So we're working with then framing those messages, as Molly mentioned, in terms of their values, what's important to them, their family, their community, their farm, And we work with local trusted agronomists to help deliver that, right? So what are the things that they need to do to effectively manage the risks that we're communicating? And because we know there's very clear evidence that when we do that, it leads to more practice change. In terms of who we're going to communicate with, and I can't take all credit for this, we recognise that farming is a family enterprise, right? So if anyone's familiar with farmers in the reef catchments, this is a mum and dad enterprise, right? So that's my grandmother, my mum's mum on the right, your left, who had a sugarcane farm at Half Tide Beach outside of Mackay. And that's my dad's family. That's me, the little 2-year-old there. On their sugarcane farm that was at Flaggy Rock outside of Serena. And if you spoke to those women, they were the boss. Sorry, my grandmother just passed away and it's just caught me. So yeah, we're, in terms of who we're going to communicate, we're really bringing women farmers as active decision makers and managers of their farms into this project and into this conversation, because if my grandparents were anything to go by, they were the boss, right? They're the boss. They're the CEO, you know? So that's who we're trying to communicate with. And this last stage, we're going to hear from Zoe, who is part of our agronomy team in terms of how we're actively going to do that through this project.
Hi there, my name is Zoe. I'm a local cane agronomist in the Mackay region. I've been working at Pharmacist for the last 8 years, and I'm also live on a cane farm with my partner, which is a 3rd generation family farm. So I've been asked today to talk about my experience being involved in the Beneath Your Feet or the DES finescale water quality monitoring program, where water samples and rainwater samples were obtained. I first heard about the project from Nick, one of the other agronomists who's actually leading the project in our region. And I've always known, just from my agronomy point of view, some of the issues that we have with pesticides entering waterways. Our house, like many cane farms, is smack bang in the middle of the canes. And that's very common. And I thought I'd just show you an example. So right now I'm filming at our local office in Mackay, but our office is actually very close to cane as well. So I'll show you. The left of us is the start of the building. And if I walk, I would say maybe 15 metres, we have a cane paddock right behind us. And so that's really common. So at home, I think I'll put a photo up on the screen for you, but we're probably maybe 15 metres from our front door to our first cane paddock. So when we have big machines coming there, spraying, fertilising, cutting. So to say that we're in the epicentre of all the farm operations is an understatement. So when I heard about the fact that we were going to be testing bore water samples and rainwater, I was really keen to see what was happening at home. Sometimes, you know, whoever's running the household often isn't aware, and especially if they're not from a farming background. But even if you are from a farming background, a lot of this wasn't even a topic that ever came up in our household, you know, because at home we consider ourselves, you know, quite responsible spray operators. You know, I looked at our results and I looked at a lot of the other bore water sample results, and there was people that had worse, people that had better results. But either way, the question I give to you is, if I was to give you a glass of water and get a drop of chemical and put 1 drop in versus another glass with 10 drops, would you drink the 1 drop? No, because to me, it didn't matter how much pesticide was in there. It was the fact that it was actually in there. So it's been a wonderful project to be part of, and, you know, a lot more education is going to come out of it. So thank you.